Like a lot of my high achiever friends and clients, they constantly turn down good deals. And it's really interesting because, they're looking for like fantastic deals because they recognize that they are not just good people, they are fantastic people, and fantastic people deserve fantastic deals.
Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen from around the world, this is the High Performers Podcast. Welcome. I'm your host, Alex Alexander. Today, very excited. Very, very excited. I have Brett with me, Brett Keone Moore. Mm-hmm. Now, we like to put the Keone in there because my wife and I have another partner we work with named Brent. And she said, no, you gotta give me something else. It can't be Brett and Brent. So it's good to see you. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I really appreciate being here.
I'm glad you are. Tell us where you're coming from today.
I'm over on Maui in Hawaii right now on the south side. And yeah, just kind of traveling in between islands at the moment. I'll be heading over to the Big Island actually later this week. So I'll be hopefully seeing you in person soon.
I'm excited about that. We get to see each other again.
Yeah.
Now, this is the High Performers Podcast. Mm-hmm. And so I talk to other people in industry, business, real estate, who I consider high performers, who are at a higher level than, say, the average folks who are just kind of working a job or something like that. That's you. And we've talked about that. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and kind of your story?
Yeah, that's great. A little background on me. My background's actually in education and video production. So it was kind of that typical transition from, what do I want to do with my life, and at different stages kind of figuring that out. And I think it was kind of in my probably early 20s. I started having the thought, be the person that I needed at different points in my life, or even another way of saying it, be the person I wish I had to mentor me at different points in my life. So that kind of led me on a course of, being passionate about music writing, songwriting, then music production, video production. Then about 2 years ago, I moved more into consulting. And one of the big areas in my life that I wish that I had was someone to help my family have better family dynamics, especially between like parents and children. And I just began offering that as a consulting service about 2 years ago, and have worked with several clients since then. So, yeah, it's a pretty incredible thing to work with people in one area of their life that then spills over and touches on every other area. Because when you help someone with their family, when there's positive change, that positive change carries over into their business life, their other relationships, and the list goes on.
Now, you mainly work with right now kind of like high net worth individuals.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And so usually they're dealing with quite a bit.
Yeah,
they tend to have quite a bit, kind of have quite a bit going on.
Yes, to say the least. Yeah.
And so you kind of get into their life and help them get things organized.
Yeah.
So
I can go into some detail on that. So typically, it's still technically a service, like a consulting service, and that'll be on call and ongoing. So like today, actually right after this, I have a meeting with another, and it's funny because I would call them all friends. That's sort of the interesting thing. So it's a funny situation to be in, and it's very unique depending on who the client is. But the best way that I could describe it is, so it's typical like today. What today's going to be is, I have a family that I'm consulting with. They're fairly like high level multi-millionaire like family. Their background is more in real estate development, both commercial, residential, and the there's the kind of like the patriarch and the matriarch of the family, and they at this point in their lives, they're in their late 60s, and they want to create a living legacy for their family. So they reached out to me, having heard of what I'd been doing for some other families, and just asked, hey, we don't have a specific project to work on, but basically our family is our primary project. They're our primary focus. So with our kids and our grandkids, we want to set them all up with their own companies or businesses, or, post-secondary education, or whatever it is that is going to kind of put them on track for the rest of their lives. We want to be able to like pass on any of the financial and personal provision for that they could ever need. But before we do that, we want them to know that they're really moving their lives in the direction that they want to be moving in. So basically what's kind of a really interesting scenario for me. So now I have like two of the kids, and then like a few nephews and nieces, and then a few of the grandkids that now I've basically been doing one-on-ones or small group meetings with. I had one meeting kind of with their not their entire family's not on the island, but the ones that were here, we all got together and just talked. We talked for a few hours, and like they just let me facilitate a conversation, asking them sort of what their dreams are. And something I've noticed is people, they'll talk about their dreams, but oftentimes not think about their own, I don't know what to call it, except maybe like a hesitancy or self-protection from the result of those dreams. So again, the couple that one of the daughter and her husband, they were just dealing with some, basically the dad offered to fund a multi-million-dollar restaurant chain for them, which is amazing. And he's like, hey, I want to bankroll the whole thing. I just want them to be happy. Like, I want them to be fulfilled. And the son-in-law is a chef who has started multiple restaurants. And the daughter is, coming off of a really difficult previous marriage. And now they are, finding themselves together kind of in their like mid 40s, and like both wonderful people, and he's assimilating to the family. So I sat down with them, and they're the ones that I have a meeting with later. And long story short, basically, I don't know how to say it. I feel like I can get vibes on where people are coming from and sort of feel where some of their inner hesitancies are. So what I've found is being direct is absolutely critical and helpful. Like it's the most amazing thing to see people, they when there's something that they're holding in, being able to just directly speak to that, and as something that I've noticed is very different in this like pool of people, like this and then part of it I think is socioeconomic. Part of it is just the core values that a lot of these families are raised with, whether they're like healthy core values or whether they're unhealthy core values. In any case, in every case, I've seen they're powerful core values. So
it sounds like from what you're saying, a lot of times that some of these kind of positive core values can kind of get shifted over time or get taken in different ways and turn into like kind of like pathologies or bad ways of living. So for example, I don't know this couple, or we never talked anything about these folks. Say you got some of the negative consequences you're talking about. Say, for example, the father-in-law funds this large business. Now the fella's running this huge business that he probably never ran before. He was a chef before. Now he's going to be an executive versus a chef. And these are things that they're probably hesitant about, but not willing to say out loud.
Oh yeah.
And so we get this. Okay, so let's talk about the high performer side. Whenever we're talking to ourselves, talking to our kids, we think, you can't be showing the world all your problems. Take the world the seed, not your need. You don't show the market all your problems. And so that turns into, if we teach that to an impressionable child, or even if we hold on to it too long ourselves, this turns into like, you can't show anybody any weaknesses ever. No one can know anything about you because they're going to use it against you. And And these can become very, very tragic thoughts that really hold us back, it sounds like.
Yes, very much so. And
then we have to hire you to come get us straight.
Well, here's the amazing thing. So I have done several sessions now with the patriarch and matriarch, like so with the family heads. And then on this next level down now, this will be my third session with the daughter and her husband now. And you can't probably see, I'm talking with my hands a lot below the camera. So the last meeting was, and I found that in these types of situations, 2 hours is a magic amount of time. So I've tried doing like shorter sessions with folks before, and I find that oftentimes, even when I'm directly calling things out, there are a lot of layers that are coming up. So usually by the end of the first hour, they're starting to really open up to respond to whatever. And that's something else that I've noticed is people are going to process in their own time. They're processing. Oftentimes they are. I work with people that are incredibly quick mental processors, and they've been in that gear for years or decades. And many times they don't use their heart to process very often. And I've also, some people like lead with like what they think and then what they feel, and then they'll take action. But there can be any mix of any of those three things that I've seen. So some people take action before thinking, and then they might think about what happened afterwards, and then they might think about how it feels. Or I found often in executives, a lot of it's like thinking and doing, and then feeling is at the bottom, or doing and thinking and feeling is at the bottom. So and that's not all like a hard thing, but I've seen that probably in the last 18 or 19 of my clients and their families. But anyways, point being, when I sat with them, I felt like the first thing that I needed to do was to tackle the son-in-law's inner feelings. And so I just asked him, like, hey, what was the hardest experience for you in your previous career, like as a chef? And he's like, well, actually, I've started multiple restaurants as a chef. I'm like, okay, interesting. And then I just felt like I could feel like he was feeling fear of control. And it's that for me was just a sort of a gut instinct. But I asked him, like, hey, how is your creative freedom in those scenarios? And he said, oh, well, and then he just launched. Like, he launched right into 10 minutes of, yeah, every time I'd like get things started and I work with the executives, and then it would just, I'd have some creative control for maybe, up to about a year. And then they'd figure out something that I was doing that worked, and they just want me to replicate it. And then suddenly there was no more creativity. And it was just from there on out, it was like a cookie cutter situation, to the point where then I get burnt out and frustrated. And then, I'd end up leaving the restaurant. So it was that story over and over and over again. And then I just asked him, like, he
had that pattern already.
Oh yeah. So he had the pattern. And so a lot of times what's happening with people is, they'll, especially when they reach the same point multiple times in their lives, there's almost always a specific fear that leads to either a breakdown or a breakthrough. And in his case, it was a breakdown of, I need to go find somewhere else where I can have creative, and he used the term creative control in his life. And so when I heard him say that, like, something in me just like got him to just analyze that. And I'm like, hey, actually, when I think of creativity, I think of creativity as not being fully controlled. So maybe that's something for you to think about. And it was really cool. So we talked for another hour. That was like sort of the second hour of our conversation, where we just talked about creativity, what it means, what it could look like. And then the number one thing that I got the couple to do was to disassociate from the specific project and like say, hey, let's say you guys don't do a restaurant. You're going to be doing something with your lives for the next year. You're newly married. And this is where I've realized it's very important to not avoid what would probably be very sensitive topics. So because I knew, I'm like, okay, so these guys are in their kind of early 40s. They're married. They're not going to be most likely having any kids of their own. So rather than like sort of sidestepping that, I just told them like, hey, you guys are newly married. What usually happens in a new marriage is there's a period of like collective collaborative creativity. And whether that collaborative creativity is having physical children, or whether that collaborative creativity goes into doing some sort of creative project together, I can feel that there's an energy that you guys have an opportunity to release, and that's to create. So let's say you don't do this restaurant thing, what are the core values that you want to bring into what you create? And it was such a fascinating conversation because they had been so afraid of having that conversation in the context of this restaurant like franchise, mainly because of his not knowing how to process the desire to not be controlled. So he has, so I'm like, sorry, I'm going so deep in one of these conversations, but it's a really interesting case study to me. So then pulling the thing that he has his negative association with away, and then being able to look at it a bit more abstractly. Like I gave them an image. I was like, okay, I want you to imagine that the fears that you guys have are like weeds in a field. And right underneath those weeds, there's a big lump of buried gold. And that gold has value in and of itself, just in the sense that it's gold. But let's say you decide to turn it into a bowl. And this is like pretty random stuff, but I'm like kind of going what's in my head. Like, let's say you turn that gold into a golden bowl. What would you do with that bowl? Like what value does the bowl have aside from its purpose, and what purpose does the bowl have aside from its value? So, because something else that I've realized is most people that I talk to, especially high achievers in like business world, they associate their value with their output. And it's something that it's really, there's a cool way of doing that. And then I've noticed that there's a sort of twisted way of doing that. And the cool way of doing that I've seen is people being able to celebrate working like well, and like having whatever kind of their desired outcome or output is, like that's definitely worth celebrating. But I've also seen, and I work with some clients who probably for 40 plus years motivated themselves by only finding like value in themselves based on the value that they were able to bring in around themselves.
That's real dangerous.
Super dangerous. Super dangerous.
You take everything outside of you and you have no control of anything.
Oh my gosh. And that's the thing. And so what ends up happening in those situations, it's cool that you bring up the word control, is then people hyper control around them because of like a lack of that inside. It's so fascinating.
Because we can't control ourselves, so we try to control the things outside of us because we're getting our happiness from outside of us. At the top of the game, everybody, all the conversations I'm having are all high achievers, high performers who are working to, okay, we've already figured out all of the details on like how to make money, how to help a lot of other people, a lot of these things that seem like that's the goal. That's what we were trying to get to. And we got there and we're kind of looking around like, there's nobody else up here at the top of the mountain. It's kind of like lonely. It's kind of crappy to be just working all the time. And so the game becomes, how do we find that inner joy? How do we find that inner peace? And how do we develop it? And how do we keep it going so that it's like an ongoing for us to draw from? Because I tell you what, I did it for years. I went back to like inspiration and motivation and excitement. That was like that's a super easy tool. You just go right back to it. Boom, I can make myself excited. I can like fire up the Tony Robbins, listen to that a couple times. I'll be charging and it wears out real quick, and it kind of wears down on when I call it the body, I mean like the mind, the physiology, and the whole spirit. So it just wears out the body. It's kind of like running on tires, and you blow out the tires and you're just going on the metal rims and you just keep going and going and going. And you think you're fine. What's crazy to me is I meet a lot of people, and I've been there quite a few times where we're running on the rims and everybody's going, hey man, what's going on? And you're like, what are you talking about? I'm doing great. Look how fast I'm going. And you're just burning everything up. And to take this analogy a little bit further, we don't realize that we're not just beating up our own body, we're tearing up the street and the road. You know what I mean? So we're like tearing up the society and the groups of people that are around us. We're also not just beating up our own body, we're beating them up.
And then with that analogy, then they're usually continue moving, so don't see the trail, like what's left in their wake, basically. And oftentimes it's broken relationships, which, what's funny is many people are like visual learners, so we'll see what's in front of us, but then we can project an inner vision of the future. But and we also have this like thing in our chest, this heart, and it has feelings in the moment, and it's also incredibly good at remembering the past. And so going back to this situation then with this couple, and it's so funny that you mentioned this too, because what you're saying is virtually like exactly what I was telling them. The principle is, we're on a journey. Like and I told them, like, we're on a quest. Imagine that your life is a quest. There's kind of 5 elements to a quest in modern literature. There's the quester, the hero. There's the place to go. There's the stated reason to go there. There's trials and troubles along the way. And then there's the real reason to go there, which is always about self-discovery and about discovery of the world around us. And it's always, by definition, different than the stated reason to go on the quest. So, for example, like a lot of high achievers in business world and like in just anything in life, like high achievers in any area of life, we will, it's okay, I want to be the best in the world at this, or I want to, and then there's like these really cool landmark achievements that get made, and then you make them. And then, like, I remember being like, I want to be mentored by like one of the most successful business consultants on earth. And like, that was like a goal of mine for the last several years of my life. And then stepping into that was more than I thought it could be, and less than I thought it should be. Because it gave me all of the external awareness and skill sets and mentalities and connections that I wanted, and more. Like, it was like, oh, I knew I'd be connected with people, but I didn't realize I get disconnected. But then at the same time, stepping into that for like a year and a half, I realized, oh, this is not what my life like should. This isn't like the like end all be all. This isn't the climax of the symphony. This isn't the like mountaintop. Like, it was funny because mountaintop moments, they don't always feel like what we think the mountaintop experience really is. If that, and I it's just, I'm using kind of a vague analogy for it, but
I've been talking about that a lot. You're right on too, because I've been talking about how like every day is our life. The little tiny things we do every single day is your life. The mountaintop experience is like a second. It's like like if you're lucky, if you're really lucky, you can get like a full 30 seconds of like really warm, like, and that's a chemical reaction of hormones rushing through your bodies and neurochemicals. And if you're really, really fortunate, you got to work your ass off, and you have to have your mind incredibly, incredibly straight the whole time you're working your ass off.
Oh yeah.
And when you achieve it, and there has to be like, good purpose, and you have to believe your good purpose, all that. And at the end of all that, you might maybe get about 30 seconds worth of a feeling that you can get from sipping on Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah. Like that's the same kind of feeling that you can get. But every single day, whenever I say I love you to my wife, and whenever I take some deep breaths and really enjoy the sunset, like I see the sunset every single day, but sometimes I'm able to really calm my mind, really relax and enjoy it and take it in. And those are different days. That's a different type of enjoyment, but that's mathematically, if you just take the amount of time, that's your life. That's life, is every single day holding hands with your wife, being happy when you drive the car instead of pissed off because the guy in front of you drives slow. All of these little tiny choices that are in our mind. And so that's why it gets so uncomfortable and so unhappy to be completely out of control. Because if we place all of the emotion and all of the satisfaction and all the joy we want to get in other people, which is our product, our how we're producing for the world, we're giving all of our ability to create our happiness out to them.
Oh yeah. And then that gets into a whole mess of situations like, do people understand my motives? That was a big one. So a big breakthrough that I had was, there's a lot of these old sayings like, do the right thing whether someone's looking or not, or whether, and to that I would extend like, let's do what we believe is in congruence with our best self. And by self, same thing, right? Mind, like our heart, our spirit, our being. And whether or not people fully understand it, which I doubt they ever will, which it's, do I come to each day with a sense of satisfaction, or am I coming to each day like with the desperation for satisfaction? And that's definitely, and the way I can say, and it's funny because I was just reflecting on this in my own life this last week as I'm like moving islands and kind of changing where my home base is, and like I'm uprooting everything in my house right now, packing stuff, and so there's like lots of memories of just different times, moments in my life with like really precious stuff. But what I realized was there's maybe 3 things that are sacred to me. Like I have this mug, like, which was given to me by my best friend. I have a stool that was given to me by my sister, and I have a guitar that was given to me by a client. And like it was so interesting. It's like, wow, that's so funny. With those 3 items, it was something memorable from a friend, something memorable from a family member, and something memorable from a client. And really, I'm like, oh wow, those are like the 3 kinds of relationships that I am experiencing in my life right now. Like I'm a single person, so I'm like, it's not like, oh, I have this from my spouse, which is I'm looking forward to someday. But there's like, I'm like, wow, that's so funny. Like these are the 3 real kind of relationships that I'm cultivating in my life: my client relationships, my family relationships, my friend relationships.
And it sounds like you do it intentionally.
Oh, very, very intentionally. I mean, it's funny. There was a book, The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. I read it when I was 17. And in it, there was a story of a guy who had, I think, over 30,000 contacts. He was a connector, and he kept details of like, his contacts. Like it was basically kind of those 3 categories. And it really stuck with me. And it's something I started practicing when I was 17. Like I would like write down what my friends' birth dates were, or I would just write down, significant, and this is like kind of before phones were really smartphones. So I'm like actually writing this stuff down,
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that I've intentionally maintained. And I'm also highly, if you take any stock in personality tests, I'm like an ENFJ. So I'm like very extroverted, very intuitive, somewhat balanced feeler, but I'm very people oriented. So like DISC test is something like there's like dominant, influencer, and then supporter and controller. So I'm high influencer, high dominant. So I'm very, very people oriented first, like a people oriented extrovert. So I'm always,
I've noticed that when I talk to you, because I always talk about numbers and money, and you always talk about people and families.
It's so true. Yeah, exactly. And like, it's like, that's going to come out in me, like no matter what conversation I'm in. But going back to that point about that family, and I mentioned to them, like, you guys are on a quest. There's the quest you think you're on and the quest you're really on. And as a consultant, what's funny is there's the job that I'm hired for, and then there's the job I perform. And I've learned
because that's what they think they're hiring you for, but they don't really know what they need.
Yeah, exactly. So what I've done, and this has taken me the last 2 years of doing this, I had like a pretty big epiphany, which was to give myself permission to tell clients initially what I believe they need. And it's a very fascinating thing because, oftentimes it's like I just the other day, I had a client offer me, and I'll use real dollars here just so there's like a sense of like being in the moment. He offered me $15K for a month of coaching on a very specific part of his life. And so we met, we talked for a couple hours, and I was like, hey, I'm going to go home. I'm going to think about this. And as I thought about it, I realized, he could use help in this area. And that would be, and I know I can execute on this, this offer that he's extending, and I feel good about that. But there was something nagging at me, and I'm like, there's this higher up area of his life that he really needs help with, and that can get dealt with very easily. And then if given some time, the stuff that I could help here is going to filter in here and then take care of this area. So I met with him again and said, hey, I don't feel right about taking like the $15K to help with this area, but this is something that I like to talk about. And we had like an hour-long conversation, and that was sort of that. What was interesting though is he then referred me to another client who has then become an investor in this other like real estate fund that I'm doing. And it was so interesting because I 10x'd based on the investment that I ended up getting versus what he was offering me individually. And it was just one of those funny things because in my past, when I had patterns of self-sabotage, the self-sabotage was there because I was projecting, oh, here's where I see this part of my life going, and I can see myself achieving that. And when there was something that I could just figure out, it sort of lost a lot of the appeal to me. Because I'm very much a fan of mystery and figuring out the story as it goes along and not being just told, I don't like spoiling the ending of a book. So what was wild was I had to address that in my probably mid-20s, and then readdress that in my late 20s, and then readdress that in my early 30s. And third time it started to really stick. Basically, I realized in my past, I would turn down opportunities just sort of for the various reasons of that self-sabotage I was talking about. And now, after having been really being mentored the last, I would say 2 years, I've realized that the only time to say no to something good is because there's something better. And it's such an interesting principle for me to see, because I don't see this done very often in aspects of my life when I'm around people that are, I'll just call them say low achievers. But I see this done incredibly well in the high achieving circles that I run in, where people will feel worthy, I guess would be maybe the word. And I see like a lot of my high achiever friends and clients, they constantly turn down good deals. And it's really interesting because, they're looking for fantastic deals, because they recognize that they are not just good people, they are fantastic people, and fantastic people deserve fantastic deals. And
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because I'm going through something right now that we're trying to let go of these deals that are really good,
Yeah.
because we know that focusing back on our one thing that we are really incredible at, it gives us incredible returns, even more than, even though these deals that we're, and I'm having a hard time at it because I basically, I'm walking away from money.
Yeah.
And it's actual, like I have it on sheets, I have it on papers. I know how much money I know it. I know the numbers I'm giving up. And so it gets more like, I'm really giving that up, and I'm having to like shove other thoughts into my brain to replace it. Because I feel like whenever you take a thought out, something has to replace it, or else it'll just shove right back in. It'll like rush in like water when you try to dig, And I'm trying to shove other thoughts in there about how important the long-term goals are, like that old experiment that everybody talks about with the kids with the marshmallows and delaying gratification, right? And it gets to like, really, if that's the game, if delaying gratification is the game, we start as 7-year-old kids with marshmallows in an experiment. And now we're at, okay, I'm going to walk away from $800,000 that I can get, pretty soon, because I know that this is an investment in the longer term and the lifestyle and everything that we're building that's happier with me and my spouse. That's because there's a lot of things also that gets bigger than just, these numbers and this amount of money. It's how does it affect my life? Like this fellow you're consulting with, he's gonna get an investment of a large amount of money to start this restaurant chain, and then he already knows within probably a year or two he's going to be miserable of being an executive. And so we can see, and we know. I think we have like intuition we don't pay attention to, and we're like purposefully blind to it.
Yep.
And allow ourselves to go down these situations and these paths.
That's a much better, more succinct version of exactly what I'm saying. And I appreciate that. And on to your point, another thing to use that analogy of the water, how what I found in my life to keep the water from rushing back in, I redirect the water, and it serves two purposes in my life. One, it hits on a value that I have very high in my life, which is people, and then it hits on another value which I have is very like core to my life, which is generosity. So when I have a really good deal, and I know I'm like, I could spend the next 3 months on that deal, but I could go for this bigger deal. Sort of an insurance policy that I have is because I have enough of a network where, 9 times out of 10, I know who that deal would be perfect for at whatever stage they're in. So then I'll do that sort of matchmaking thing. And most of the time with those situations, like I'm not even taking like a finder's fee. It depends. It definitely depends on a case by case basis. But then I know, okay, do I want this deal to make the world a better place? Like, is the result of this deal something that I believe in? It's actually something I learned from a mutual friend of ours, Michael, who, we at one point were working on a really cool idea for musical playgrounds. Like they're actually play structures that could get put into schools and stuff, and they would teach musical concepts to kids, like, the 12 steps to us, to like, in any key. It's like, now you can steps, and like, it's really, really cool stuff. And I was like, hey, dude, I really think I should get this like patented or copyrighted or something. And he was like, Brett, do you feel like this idea would help the world? I was like, yeah, it's 100%. Like that's mainly why I wanted to do it. He's like, okay. If there was someone else on earth that was more capable and ready to sort of bring this idea to life, would you choose that? Or would you choose you redirecting your entire life for maybe the next 5 to 10 years in order to make this thing happen? And it was really interesting because in this sort of made up scenario, it was, let's say I was going to pass $100 million to somebody, or I was going to make $100 million in like the next 10 years. But everything in my life would get consumed by this one thing. Is this the one thing that I'd want to have be consumed of? And my answer was very intuitively, easily, no. I'd rather this idea get out to the world. Oh, and then in that scenario, if I gave it to the world, it could happen the next year. It's like, that for me was like, yes. So, and that's part of the blessing and the curse of, I think, being a visionary, which I know you are as well. Have all these incredible ideas, and the potential IP can be massively scalable. But, and this is a common curse with consultants as well, is they'll see these like amazing ways of getting things done, but I have worked with like high level consultants where they'd pay people to take their ideas if they were being fully honest, just to see their ideas come to life. And then interestingly enough, a lot of those people become angel investors. But
it's really interesting. Go into that a little bit. So consultants who are constantly working with people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And seeing their ideas, helping them, you get so good at it, and so good at, like, if you just even have a little idea, you get so good at, how to make it like grow from the seed into the actual tree and become fruitful for all the people and all the family. And so say it again. Some consultants who have these ideas will pay somebody else to go, you explain it.
If they're being honest. I mean, one of the little adages in the consulting world is a really good consultant will he'll steal your watch and tell you the time, or I think he'll steal your watch and he'll sell you the time.
Sell you the time. That's great.
Yeah, but the funny thing that I've seen, like, is, I mean, there's, and I've worked. I just have several friends now who work like in, like, say, the big threes, like, since we're talking about consulting world stuff, like, Bain and Company, BCG, Boston Consulting Group, and McKinsey. And then I'm thinking more about friends at Korn Ferry and some other of these, like, interesting, like, not main three, but they're kind of very peripheral. But these are like massive, like super massive consulting firms.
Mm-hmm.
They're so genuinely curious people. Like, it's a trait that I've seen in anyone with probably like high intuitive thinking, or high analytics, high strategic thinking. They're very curious how things work, and they love knowing how it all ticks. And but they oftentimes, I mean, they're harnessing that creativity, because it really is a form of creativity and intelligence to accomplish specific goals. But oftentimes those goals are really for other people. So it's, I've seen people work on projects that they're clearly not passionate about, but what ends up happening is, and this is because I felt this in myself too. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this too. Like, when you're putting a deal together, and it's like suddenly all the pieces fit, and there's a solution that you find for this where it's like everybody's happy. Yeah. What? Like, everybody wins. Like, what? Like, I'm winning too. Like, what?
And escrow is actually going to do it. Oh yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Exactly. They're going to do it. And it's, for me, it is like a drug. Like that feeling. I mean, and we were talking about those brief mountaintop experiences. The altitude gets thin, and like it gets there's a euphoric feeling at the top of the mountain for sure. And you're right, it doesn't last. Yeah. And chasing that feeling basically becomes a type of drug. Yeah. And
so I want to talk about that. I've been watching Andrew Huberman. Are you familiar with him at all? Yeah. So I've been watching him talk about dopamine. Everybody's talking about dopamine. That's the big, dopamine depletion, dopamine hacks, trying to increase your ability to create dopamine. And, it's really important. And that's sort of where I got this idea of the everyday little tiny things. That's your life. Like, if you look at the mathematic, like, do a spreadsheet of the time of your life, and 1 minute every single day of holding your wife's hand is so much more time, and it's more of your life than the one mountaintop experience that takes a year or 2 or 5 or 10 years to get this amazing. And you think, we think it's not, you can't quantify it. You think there's going to be a quantifiable relationship between the amount of good feeling and like the amount of achievement, but they're completely separate. Like, you can't go to a higher feeling. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you could take heroin if you really want to get stupid and like
Right.
really get a great feeling. But I mean, really what we're doing is we're trying to be happy. Everybody's doing things to
Mm-hmm.
be happier. We want safety, so we'll feel happy. We want
Oh yeah.
comfort and all this kind of thing, and
Yeah.
recognition from people. All of that goes back to our insides of us,
Yeah.
trying to feel happy and manipulate our own physiology and hormones and neurochemicals all at the same time as we're just going through this world.
And the way I would look at that is so fascinating. I've been thinking about this a lot. There is, and I in my past have gone through that sort of mouse maze, figuring things out. I've gotten burnt out going through that whole process.
Mm-hmm.
And where I'm at now in my life is I can appreciate a lot of the help that people offer. But me appreciating their help and accepting their help are two different things.
Talk about that.
Yeah. So in this case, like I've been following a lot of this, like dopamine hacking and like a lot of like, there are truly, I mean, it's actually pretty fascinating for me from a just biochemical, biopsychological perspective. There's some really smart people offering like ways that I'm fairly certain would work to a certain degree. But if I have a different way, like, so where people are talking about, essentially, if I boil that down into a word, it'd be pleasure. And then I see joy and I go, oh, I can either run through these processes for the pleasurable experiences, or I can have like sustainable joy experiences in my life. And here's an interesting thing is like, I've been thinking a lot about the types of even supplements that I'm taking. Cause I'm all about like helping to augment my physical, like emotional, psychological, like all that health. But I've become more careful about which tools I use to accomplish my goals. And do I, like there are certain supplements, like I was taking creatine for a while, and actually I don't want to ingest something externally that I can cultivate internally. And if there's anything that I absolutely can't find a way to cultivate internally, then I'll look for that as an external means of like augmenting my life. And this is like a very core philosophy to me now, is like, I've realized, what can I cultivate internally? And joy is one of those things. And it's absolutely incredible. Like,
how
it's just funny that we're both using the exact same word too. And it really is something that I could try to, receive joy just from accolades or from external or from substance abuse or from whatever it is, but I'm realizing that means, and this is kind of interesting thing that happens in biology, is when you outsource like a specific type of like hormone or supplement, your body, if given that source regularly from an external methodology, our bodies are smart enough to then stop producing internally. And that to me is the ultimate danger of, say, trying to outsource my joy. Am I getting joy from my accomplishments, or am I getting joy from, this is the first couple of years of my life where I've made significant amounts of money, and I've realized, whoa, it's definitely easy to fall into a trap of like, wow, I made like, I'm like, the first time I made like $1,000 in a day, I remember like standing up taller that day. Like, wow, I'm a badass. Like, and ultimately though, that was like a very slippery slope for me a couple of years ago, of just realizing, if that's where my joy is coming from, then ultimately whatever my internal, joy is, it's going to shut down. And it's this interesting thing, because what I've realized is how my joy still is related, like in the world around me, like, but generosity, like I'll tell you like one little thing. I was walking into a store the other day, there's a guy there, like sitting on, kind of sitting on the ground, asking for cash. And I just told him, like, I don't have any cash on me. Sorry, dude. And I go in, and then I realized, you know what? Like, I was there to buy myself lunch, and I bought him lunch. And then I bought myself lunch, and I came out and gave him a lunch. And he's like, are you sure you don't want this? I'm like, no, dude, like, this is for you. Like, and like, I showed him my bag. I'm like, I have my own. And I tell you, dude, like, that, if you were looking at it from like an objective standpoint, that is just the tiniest amount of money that you could spend on something, like less than $20. But the feeling of, because I stopped and we talked for about 10 minutes. He's from the same island as me. We knew some of the same people. We were the same age. And like, for me, it was that feeling of like, I want to share something with this person. And again, there's the quest that we think we're on, and there's the quest that we're really on. There's the quest that in that moment, I was like, oh, I'm going to go just buy him lunch. But as I stopped and talked to him, I was like, oh, I didn't want to just share my lunch with this dude. I wanted to share my core value of valuing people. And like, as we talked, I just got to like look him in the eyes and ask him about his life. And he asked me about my life. And it was just like kind of a casual conversation, but like, there were like smiles on both of our faces. And I'm like, oh, I tell you, dude, like I experienced more joy that day in my life than the last couple $100,000 that I made, and it was interesting. It's just a really interesting thing that it's just, then that's actually why I've been thinking about joy so much, like probably this last week or so. So it's just very, very fascinating to me that we're talking about it. But
it seems like we do it. It seems like we do it, especially high achievers, for a shortcut. Like, I know, like, we sort of have an intrinsic, maybe something inside us that we know that we should do it the right way. We know we should try to be joyful. We know we should try to remain calm. We know we should try to remain positive and have gratitude. But as a shortcut, well, I can feel real good right now. I just produce and I make those people like me and feel good. So all I got to do is just make them, and that's quick. That's easy. I could do that. Yeah. And so it becomes a shortcut. And then we go, oh, well, that worked last time. Do I really want to do the making myself grow inside? Or I just want to take the shortcut and make these people, give them what they want, and I'll get money and I'll feel good.
Dude, oh my gosh, you're so speaking to like the last couple of years of my life. This is so
taking
right
the shortcut.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And not just the last couple of years of my life, but I mean, there have been the last couple of years of my life, I realized, oh, I can actually make a lot of money for myself and other people. And that is a great way for people to like me. And that was like kind of buried underneath, like as a little like disclaimer, something like subtext, like, oh, and people will like you.
Hey, can I tell a story about that?
Sure. Yeah.
Exactly what you're talking about. I'm going to make these people money and they're going to like me. We had a situation, we made these people a ton of money, and all the people that we made a lot of money for, they're used to people making them a lot of money. That's what they do. They invest money and people go make them a lot of money, and they go, oh, thank you, that's great. And we're thinking like, yeah, we're going to be their best friends. We're getting invited to Christmas, and I will be the best man in the wedding. And they're like, I'm sorry, what's your name again? Who are you? And so
oh,
that was a big shock to me. I thought it was really going to be different. And so if you're in business to try to make money for other people, to make friends, to make them like you, maybe it'll work that way. I doubt it.
Yeah, dude, it's so it reminds me of a story too. I was talking to a buddy of mine. He runs like one of the top like music publishing company in LA. And it's so funny because he had a very similar situation where there was like a contract offer. Someone was offering to buy this dude's catalog for like 20 million. And he's like, dude, you could easily get 25 million for this catalog, but you have to ask for 26.5 and this and this. And basically the guy's like, will you do the contract negotiation for me? He's like, sure, I'll help you with that. So he helps him with it. And he's like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to charge you a percentage fee. I'm only going to charge you 25 grand. And I know that I'm going to be able to make you like an additional 5 million. He's like, whoa, okay. And so he's thinking like, this guy's going to be so stoked afterwards, like super awesome. But because the guy, once his expectation level was sort of set, like, oh, I deserve 25 million, then it's such a funny thing. He in his mind, this client he was a composer, um, was like, well, why am I paying you $25,000 again? Like, it's like, and it was just such a funny thing. Like, and that's a really interesting thing. Like, because I've definitely learned, I will say, that there's executing and adding value. And this is one of like the first lessons that I know, like, associate consultants like first learn when they step up into sort of the big leagues, is learn how to execute before trying to add value. And like executing as in, here's the way things are normally done, and just go ahead and do that. And in this guy's case, he afterwards, he's like, I probably should have just taken the 2% fee. He's like, because that's what was actually standard. And offering something like, in his mind, more generous, but to the guy, it was a value add that he didn't. Well, it was a very fascinating situation. The point being, it's funny how often, like, where the pat on the back comes from. Because for me, I've learned to just like get a little more flexible and just pat myself on the back, and then like kind of move on.
You're probably the only one who will.
Dude, yeah, it's so true.
Maybe your mom, but that's probably gonna be the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, sweetie, good job.
Oh, sweetie, good job.
Yeah. Yes, thanks, mom. And but yeah, it's a really fascinating thing. I just really appreciate hearing somebody else kind of going through some of this stuff. It's like, because here's another, dude. I do not have these conversations very often with other people, and it's so like painfully refreshing to know that other people are kind of going through like the similar brambles. But I at the end of the day, like, I really sense, I just appreciate this so much, because it gives me some perspective on, it's like good reminders for me, in how I like remembering to just slow down and breathe. Even, it's so funny. It seems like such a simple thing, but like, as you were saying that earlier, I was like, wow, that I can reincorporate that into my life today.
Yeah, big time. Hey, we didn't, there's something that we didn't talk about, your story, which is really fascinating. Your kind of life story. You've been through trials and tribulations and come out stronger on the other side.
Yeah. When I was a little guy, like 4 years old, I had some really bad kidney complications. I spent age 4 to like age 7, basically in and out of hospitals, having all the surgeries, and just like, I was that little kid that like carried a bag that was coming out of my, kidney, like, to school every day. So I had my lunchbox in one hand, I had this bag in the other hand. And it was definitely, I believe that I've always been a very empathetic person. And that's a skill set that has definitely come in handy with my consulting world. It's also incredibly painful to, as a very small child, like, have empathy for others and be struggling like on your own. So that there was just a lot there. And then when I was like 17, I got diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. Doctors told me I'd be in a wheelchair by the time I was 30, that I'd go deaf, that I'd lose the use of my hands. And at the time, I was planning on being a like professional musician and music instructor. And that was a huge blow. So I went back into the hospital, did all these experimental surgeries. And so I think like there have been a lot of physical pain. And consequently getting over the fear of pain was big for me.
You talked specifically about some of the pain with what they had to do with your bones.
Yeah. So like literally doctors. So I spent 2 years and in the hospital having these 4 major surgeries where doctors like broke all my ribs in the back, drilled holes through my scapula, broke my scapula, broke my hip, took bone out of like soft bone tissue out of my hip, used it as glue, ran like titanium rods and wires to like essentially glue my scapula to like my ribs, and then did the same thing to the other side, and then went after a year, took out like metal, and after several months took out metal. And the whole thing was because my body was so concaved, like because all the muscles in my upper back, atrophied severely. And so my shoulders, you could, almost touch them together in front of me. And it was just very disheartening for a 17-year-old to go through. And yeah, it was, but what I had the surgeries done in a Shriners Hospital on Oahu, and which was a children's hospital. So I was, you typically age out of that when you're 18. So I was right on the cusp of like aging out of this. And then I actually did, but they continued to do my surgeries because that was part of a process that I started at 17. But man, it was so wild to see dozens of little kids. I mean, it's like kids that reminded me of who I was when I was 4, 5, 6, 7, and 10 years old. Kids born without hip bones. Kids born like without body parts. Kids that just had the most brutal. And these kids came from all over the South Pacific typically. And this was a hospital on Oahu where they were all getting like usually experimental surgeries done, but doctors would come from all over the world and volunteer and do these surgeries for free for these kids. And I would definitely say that's where generosity, where I just got like hit in the face with like real radical generosity. And that definitely left a mark on me. But yeah, it made me realize that everyone's situation they're going through in their lives, I think of tough times as percentages and not as like kind of empirical value systems, meaning that was me going through 100% of like horrific tough time in my life, but someone else's 100% horrific tough time, like I don't need to quantify whose is worse than the others. It's, well, I'm at my 100%, you're at your 100%. Mm-hmm. Like I really feel for you. And it might be for that person that there's just something, completely comparable, and it doesn't need to be. So that was a huge life lesson for me, is to understand that, everybody's going through their own stuff. And oh man, like what was wild was for me, I honestly got a lot of strength. Not feeling like other people had it worse than me, because that actually doesn't help. I've tried it. It doesn't help. But the feeling of I'm watching these people push through their circumstances, and I'm seeing something inside of them, like courage. Like courage was a huge thing. Like, because I've still never witnessed more courage in my life than at Shriners Hospital on Oahu, with like watching all these children. And so like, whether it's courage or bravery or just empathy towards others, or, being polite to their nurses, depending, even if they're in a crazy amount of pain, or like and going back to kind of what we were talking about earlier about the quest that we're really on, it's really about discovering more about ourselves and discovering more about the world around us. I thought I was there in that hospital to restructure my skeletal system, but I was actually really there restructuring my mindsets. And that has been something that has made, such a huge positive difference in my life. And it was about self-discovery. Who am I and who do I want to be? And so I would say that's like by far still the biggest lesson that I'm getting to impart with clients is, you can see what the top of the mountain looks like. You've probably actually been there and been up and down it for a long time, or now you're living there. But what have you learned about yourself? And who are you and who do you want to be? And it's so cool, dude, like hearing your interconnectedness with family, because that's the other thing I saw at that hospital was kids were typically there with their families, and just the love that gets, anytime there's something really negative in our lives, I just see it where like there's love and care that ends up getting released to kind of like counterbalance. So like the worse that I've seen things get in my life and other people's lives, the better I've seen things end up being. And I don't know, it seems cliche, but it's definitely, that's what's, I've always wondered, like, so I'll be, with like multi-millionaire, even billionaire clients now, wondering, what do I have to add value into their lives? These people seem like they have it all, And oftentimes they have everything figured out in one area of their life and nothing figured out in another area of their life. And the area that I've seen in everyone's lives is wanting to learn how to cultivate positive relationships with the people they care about.
Wow. Teaching people who are so amazing at everything how to have the most simple thing is just to have a simple relationship with another human.
Yeah, dude, it's so, and what's funny is, we use the term, I even use the term simple relationship, but it's like, are any relationships actually, anything is simple when it works well. But suddenly it gets really complicated as soon as it breaks.
Because then you have to go make all the, exactly. Oh, that's really good.
Anyways, dude, and I don't know how long we're supposed to go or whatever, but dude, I just thank you. I just thought this is such an enlightening, helpful conversation for me.
Oh, I'm glad. Well, maybe I got to charge you for the consulting fee this time.
Yeah, I'm sure. Take me out to lunch sometime.
Okay, perfect. That'll work. So we are kind of, I want to be respectful of your time, and I got another one. Actually, I get to talk to Michael after this.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Our mutual friend.
Tell him I said hi.
Yeah. And so before we go, I'd like to give you a chance to kind of, you actually have like a message. You have something that's a purpose in your life and something you're working towards. And a lot of times we're kind of like, the folks I talk to, we're trying to make money. We are trying to help people, but we're trying to make money. Why don't you talk a little bit? I'll let you kind of like, tell your message if you want, and kind of what would you like to leave people with?
Well, thank you. That's actually incredible. I've never seen that done in a podcast before. If I would say, I keep going back to this like quest thing. I just want people to be aware that I spent so much of my life dreaming, and I spent the last season of my life helping to make my dreams and other people's dreams come true. And then I realized, like, there's multiple levels there's kind of the dream that we have, and then the 5 whys below it. And it's that deeper why that it can save everyone so much time and effort and energy by figuring out why they want what they want and figuring out what we really want. It seems like such a simple thing, but if we really would just take time to cultivate inner joy, and then do that for an amount of time where it can take effect. Like, right, if I have a headache and I take a couple ibuprofen, I don't immediately feel better. I have to give that time to work. And I've seen that joy can take a few months, or it can even possibly take a few years to really take full effect, in an ongoing way. Living with joy as a tool, and not just joy, but figuring out what kinds of tools are actually sustainable in our lives. I see that as being such a helpful way of creating just real unity between people, and because it comes from an inner place of unity. So all I have to say, like, take care of our inner self. We can take better care of the relationships around us. We can, and also, if I were to say like one thing to people that if I could snap my fingers and like the whole world would understand it, it would be to really believe that we are all fantastic people, to let go of a lot of the false projections that have been put on us or that we put on ourselves, and to have fantastic relationships, to have fantastic deals, to have like fantastic levels of joy in our lives, and to be able to receive as much love as we're like willing to give out to the world.
That sounds like a really beautiful place to cap it off for today.
Yes, dude, that's my whole thing. Anyways, Ax, thank you so much, dude, and like I really appreciate being a part of the podcast.
Oh, I'm so glad you came on today. You have no idea how wonderful it was to see you and be on here. This is really great.
Yeah, and I'll catch up with you in person too in the week.
Yeah, we're gonna see you in like about a week or so, right?
I'll be there.
Very good. Okay. Well, this was Brett Keone Moore. Do you want to let people know where they can reach out and get in touch with you?
Yeah, I would say I would normally never do this, but I'm going to give out my personal email address.
Oh, no.
Yeah. No, I mean, especially I feel like if this resonates with anybody that wants to know more about the world of consulting or wants to, mainly just know, have some, especially if you're interested in helping other people in this style of consulting, like family style consulting, I definitely have a lot to offer. So I'd be happy to just pass along what I know. It's just brettKmoore@gmail.com, BRETTKMOORE@gmail.com.
Brett K. Moore, using joy as a tool.
Yep, joy as a tool.
Using joy as a tool. Thank you for joining us today. If this is your first time joining us, my name is Alex Alexander. I'm the host of the High Performers Podcast. And so we make these videos. I run a company here in Hawaii. We're in Kailua Kona, Hawaii. And I run a company called Hawaii Escape Company and Integrity Portfolio Management. We sell raw land in Ocean View, Hawaii. We make these videos for free. And we don't charge you. We don't have any sort of kit or anything else like that we can help you out with. We just make the videos because I personally was able to take a bunch of free videos like this off the internet, put the information to use, and I changed my life. And I think you can do the same too. If things aren't going the way you want, make a change. So from downtown Kailua Kona, this is Alex Alexander, Brett Moore. Aloha.
Thanks.